the assassination itself. So, if there was a conspiracy, who was behind it? The House Assassinations Committee concluded in 1979 that President Kennedy was probably killed as a result of a conspiracy. There's certainly no shortage of theories about who may have been responsible. 48 Hours correspondent Richard Schlesinger reports.
I was standing on the bridge. I could see the president as they turned the corner.
Ed Hoffman is a deaf mute. He was in Dallas that day.
And I saw a man standing right in this area here.
He's been telling his story for almost 30 years.
I could see him pick up something and bend over the fence. And then I saw a puff of smoke. He started running, and then I saw a brown rifle. I could see the rifle.
Jim Moore is an author who has devoted years to a study of the Kennedy assassination, and he doubts Ed Hoffman's story.
Ed Hoffman, I have a great deal of sympathy for someone who's grown up with his handicaps, but the fact remains that if you go pace it off, he was 786 feet away from the back of that fence, had to have incredibly good vision. He had between him and the corner of that fence three things: a freight train, the signal boxes, and a Cutty Sark billboard. Now, I know that Ed Hoffman has a lot of gifts based on his disabilities that many of us don't possess, heightened senses, that sort of thing, but I don't think he's got X-ray vision.
This is a replica. This was used in the movie, in fact.
The JFK Assassination Information Center, just 3 blocks from the scene of the crime, attracts the curious, the skeptical, the obsessed.
Tickets for the bus tour. For the bus tour.
No crime this century has been studied more closely. And over the years, critics of the lone gunman theory have come up with scores of conspiracy theories. They break down into 3 general groups.
I think the evidence shows that the CIA killed President Kennedy.
Fidel Castro was the mastermind behind the Kennedy assassination.
I think there's a very strong case that Carlos Marcello was the mastermind of a plot to kill him.
Mark Lane became the first conspiracy superstar with his 1966 bestseller, Rush to Judgment, which condemned the Warren Report. He's got a new bestseller now called Plausible Denial, which alleges, he says proves, the assassination was orchestrated by the CIA.
Well, the motive. I suppose we can think of 3 different things. Number 1, John Kennedy was ending the war in Vietnam. Number 2, John Kennedy was involved in a program of rapprochement with Fidel Castro. But above all, John Kennedy said, I'm going to destroy the Central Intelligence Agency.
Why couldn't they have done a better job? Why did they leave so many clues for people like you to pick up on, some of which you describe as being almost ridiculously obvious? I mean, are they that bad at conspiracy?
They did an excellent job. The president was killed. The CIA, in September of 1963, set up a charade which would not only blame Lee Harvey Oswald, but would immobilize any commission which was investigating. It would immobilize a commission because anyone, whether it's Hoover or Warren, whoever was appointed, would be told that it's World War III if you tell the truth.
Oswald's trip to Mexico City, says Lane, was part of the CIA charade to link Oswald to the KGB and blame the assassination on the Soviets.
The CIA did reach Earl Warren. They told him there's going to be a nuclear war if you don't lie to the American people. Say Oswald did it alone, and let's close this thing down. He said, okay.
That's an explosive charge, one that's been made for years. And now, for the first time on camera, the CIA man who would know has agreed to talk. Richard Helms was director of covert operations at the time of the assassination. He went on to become CIA director.
And I am simply saying this on television because I would like the American public to understand that the CIA was not involved in that assassination, regardless of what anybody says. I tell you, we checked up on it later, not only at the time, but then we checked out when the Warren Commission was sitting and so forth, to be sure that nobody had been in Dallas on that particular day.
You did that in November of 1963?
Of course.
Why did you do that? Had anybody accused the CIA at the time?
The place was in an uproar, the country was in an uproar. There was great concern that this might have been a foreign doing of some kind.
But who asked you to check where your own agents were?
We did that on our own.
Why?
Well, because I just thought it was a wise thing to do.
Why?
Because under the circumstances, you would have thought that it would be a nice thing to know if we had had any people. It might have been very useful if we had people in Dallas on that particular time. They might have been able to contribute something to this. They might have been in the crowd watching the cortege.
Is that why
go
you
by.
checked, or did you check because you thought maybe some of your guys might have
I
been
did
involved?
not think that anybody was involved. And don't try and make me say it.
Was there a feeling that there was reason to be scared of the fact that the President of the United States was that mad at the CIA?
Well, we were unhappy, but there's nothing we could do about it. What would you suggest that one do under the circumstances?
Well, you know what people have suggested you did under the circumstances.
What was that?
You had the President killed.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Absolutely untrue. Emphatically.
Can you prove that?
How would you expect me to prove it? Can those people who make the allegation prove it?
There's little doubt that the CIA under Kennedy did try to kill Fidel Castro, and that's at the heart of a second theory, that Castro ordered the president's murder.
Kennedy was trying to get Castro, but Castro got him first.
Michael Kurtz teaches history at Southeast Louisiana University. He's written a book fingering Castro.
The CIA had indeed contracted with the mafia to use hitmen to kill him.
Well, Castro is a wily man. He must have known, if he was behind this, what the consequences would be. Why would he take that risk?
You're quite right. There was a great risk of retaliation by the U.S. of a full-scale military invasion of Cuba and overthrow of him. Castro, in my opinion, came down to the most basic of human motives, survival.
In fact, this was President Lyndon Johnson's theory. Aides say he was talking about Castro in this 1969 interview with Walter Cronkite.
I can't honestly say that I've ever been completely relieved of the fact that there might have been international connections.
You mean you still feel that there might have been?
Well, I have not completely discounted.
Well, that would seem to indicate that you don't have full confidence in the Warren Commission report.
No, I think the Warren Commission's study, and I think first of all, is composed of the ablest, most judicious, bipartisan men in this country. Second, I think they had only one objective, and that was the truth. The third, I think they were competent and did the best they could. But I don't think that they or me or anyone else is always absolutely sure of every thing that might have motivated Oswald or others that could have been involved. But he was quite a mysterious fellow, and he did have connections that bore examination, and the extent of the influence of those connections on him, I think history will deal with much more than we're able to now.
How would it come out in history?
I don't know.
Why would Fidel Castro risk touching off a war against his island in order to make Lyndon Johnson president of the United States? That's bizarre.
Because Jonathan Quitney is an investigative reporter who made his name covering the mafia. He insists all the evidence points to Carlos Marcello, the boss of the New Orleans mob.
Carlos Marcello was a particular character who had an overwhelming motive for wanting Kennedy dead, which was that the Kennedys had almost killed him and were in the process of destroying his vast, very profitable commercial empire. They essentially kidnapped him off the street, dumped him in the jungle in Guatemala to die. He almost did. It took him about 6 weeks to get out of the Guatemalan jungle, somehow make it back to the United States. And they were bringing a second deportation order against him, and the hearing commenced on November 22nd, the day of the assassination. Lee Oswald, who clearly was involved in the assassination in some way, I think he was firing a gun at the president, was working with two people who were at Carlos Marcello's right hand. David Ferry, Marcello's personal pilot, who was out at Marcello's farm repeatedly in the weeks before the assassination. Guy Bannister, who was the investigator for the defense of Carlos Marcello in the deportation hearing. And Jack Ruby, who the Warren Commission led you to believe was some minor nightclub owner, was in fact a major mafia figure.
But is the mafia in the business of killing people on national television? I mean, Ruby shot Oswald on national television.
I don't think that was the plan, but at that point there was no choice. They had to get rid of him. My guess is that they intended to kill Oswald earlier. They weren't working for Fidel Castro. There's no evidence that they were. There's no evidence that they were working for the CIA. There's no evidence that they were working for any earthly person other than Carlos Marcello.
Author Jim Moore began as a critic of the Warren Commission report of the lone gunman theory, but now he supports it and is critical of the conspiracy theories.
The last Lou Harris poll that I saw showed that 80-odd% of the American public disbelieved the Warren report. I can guarantee you that 99.999% of the American public have never read it. It's very easy for people to disbelieve something they're unfamiliar with. What I'd suggest that people do is go to their library, check out the Warren Commission report, the House Select Committee volumes, the 26 volumes of evidence, the critical literature, my book. Use the brain God gave them and make up their own mind, but don't believe an hour-long TV documentary has solved the case. It can't do it.
Well, why have these conspiracy theories persisted through the years? I mean, it's been almost 30 years.
That's right. Well, I think there's three reasons. Number one, for many people, John Kennedy has assumed a sort of a mythical stature that he did not attain and probably did not deserve in life. I'm not trying to downgrade his memory, but that's the way it is. It's difficult to believe that a human zero like Lee Oswald could have taken him out so easily. Secondly, the conspiracy theories are much like reading that Elvis will sing in the Super Bowl that the National Enquirer puts out. Nobody, I won't say nobody believes him, there are probably some people who do, but they're much more fun to contemplate than the lone assassin theory. The third reason is that people haven't done their homework.
About the only thing most critics have in common, besides an absolute conviction the Warren report is wrong, is an absolute conviction their theory is right. Any crime, if it's studied for as many years by as many people, would probably generate as many theories. So how will this all end? Almost all the critics demand another investigation. But if another probe concludes one of the theories is the truth, chances are there will still be conspiracy theorists convinced that the cover-up is continuing.
Since the assassination in 1963, CBS News has been following this momentous story, has been tracking the key witnesses. All of them have changed over the years. Some of them have died. Some of them are still with us, including Mrs. Ruth Paine. It was, of course, in Mrs. Paine's suburban Dallas home that Marina Oswald was staying at the time of the assassination. And it was in Mrs. Paine's garage that Oswald stored the rifle found in the school book depository. Mrs. Paine was interviewed in St. Petersburg, Florida.
I am concerned that people are being misled and that will continue. I don't see anything changing that. I do believe he fired the shot. I believe he acted alone. But I'm feeling that a lot of folks don't feel that way. And I can tell my own children what I think and why, but that's a very small portion of that generation. And how will that generation get its information and the following people? So I wonder how history will read this ultimately. I personally think the Warren Commission did a very creditable job, a very thorough job. They have been discredited by people who have not done their research. I feel that Oswald was the lone gunman and did kill the president.
More than a third of Americans alive today weren't even born when John Kennedy was shot. Our poll shows that younger Americans are even more skeptical than their elders that Oswald acted alone. Small wonder that filmmaker Oliver Stone has found a receptive audience for his blend of fact and fiction on film.
John Kennedy travels to Texas.
I think that my movie speaks an inner truth about an event that happened in our history that's very dark, very sinister.
JFK, the movie, has angered many but it's also sparked renewed interest and debate about what happened more than 28 years ago.
Kennedy was killed under suspicious circumstances for political reasons. And I think our country changed forever after that day. That's it. Yeah, exactly. I like that relationship. I think that we do present an alternative point of view that there was a coup d'etat in this country.
That's the message. That's your conclusion that you've reached through your research and preparation and production of this film.
That's correct.
That there was a coup d'etat?
That's correct.
The movie is based on New Orleans prosecutor Jim Garrison's own investigation of the murder.
We know the key individuals involved, and we're in the process of developing evidence now.
Garrison's investigation culminated with the 1969 trial of Clay Shaw, a socially prominent businessman.
I am completely innocent of any such charges.
Garrison tried to prove that Shaw was part of a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy.
I have not conspired with anyone at any time or any place to murder our late and esteemed President John F. Kennedy or any other individual.
Garrison failed to convince the jury. They deliberated less than an hour before returning a not guilty verdict. Shaw died in 1974. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying with the movie. You say there was a coup d'etat. Is that fair?
That's fair. As I said before, the film outlines two conspiracies, one to kill Kennedy and another one to cover it up. In the conspiracy to kill Kennedy, what the film says is that something is in the wind. Kennedy is unpopular because of his Cold War position, not with Khrushchev, with Cuba, with Laos, and with Vietnam. Nothing is on paper. Everyone has a plausible deniability. But there is a general desire, a silent assent, let's say, that Kennedy has to be stopped, that he cannot be reelected in 1964 and assume a second term because he is a dangerous man. Who actually kills him? I don't know. But what I suggest is that it is done very quietly, very secretly, and involves a very small group of people. So for all I know, it could have been military intelligence or it could have been the CIA. We have a history of the Office of Naval Intelligence possibly involved with Oswald. The Army intelligence destroyed its records routinely on Oswald, they say in 1973. So we don't really know if it was CIA or military intelligence. It looks like we could go in that direction. But I don't have a smoking gun. I have no evidence or proof of that.
I think it's a fascinating piece of propaganda. And basically, I think because it tends to leave in the minds, particularly of young people, that the CIA, the FBI, the military, the Warren Commission, and Johnson were involved in a conspiracy, I think it's an evil film. Simply because it leaves the impression that the federal government itself and major elements of the government were involved in the assassination of an American president. And I think that's evil because I don't think that happened. I don't think it could have happened.
It is in the famous Zapruder film that we have immutable evidence